The night air was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant cry of an owl deep in the forest. A single candle burned inside the small cottage on the hill, its glow trembling against the window. From afar, the place looked abandoned, the kind travelers would avoid, whispering stories of spirits and curses. But within its walls, a woman sat by the fire, her eyes reflecting a quiet storm. Mara? Her hands moved with practiced ease, grinding herbs into a wooden bowl. Yet her face carried the weight of memories too heavy for her years. Anyone who saw her might have mistaken her for a recluse. But she wasn't hiding. She was surviving. Once she had lived in the heart of the kingdom, surrounded by family and laughter. Her father, a man of great wisdom, and her mother, a woman with the same healing gift, had been respected, until envy poisoned the nobles' tongues. What they called a blessing, the royal house twisted into a curse. "Back to me!" she spat, voice trembling with rage. "You lied! You—" Her hand shook as she pointed toward him. "You stood here in my home, listening to my pain, knowing it was your bloodline that cast me into exile. And still you said nothing." Kale stepped forward, shedding his gloves as though to reach for her. "I wanted to tell you." "No," she snapped, voice cracking. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, unwilling to let him see her break. "You let me bare my soul. You let me believe you were different. But you're just like the rest of them. Royal blood that ruins everything it touches." The knights shifted uncomfortably, glancing between their king and the furious woman before him. But Kale didn't care for their eyes. His gaze never left her. "I am not the ones who banished your family. That was before my reign. You wear their crown," she cut him off sharply, chest heaving. "You carry their blood. You are their son, and that makes you no different in my eyes." The wolf bond tugged mercilessly at her, whispering to run into his arms. But Mara turned away, clenching her fists. Every inch of her trembled, not just with anger, but with the agony of wanting him despite herself. Kale reached out, voice breaking. "Mara, please, let me explain. Let me make it right." But she slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like thunder. The latch clicked into place, a barrier not of wood and iron, but of wounded trust. Outside, Kyle stood frozen, the weight of her rejection heavier than any crown he had ever borne. For the first time in years, the Alpha King felt powerless. Inside her cottage, Mara slid down the door, her body shaking, tears spilling freely. The bond clawed at her heart, screaming for the man she had just shut out. But her hatred for the royal house roared louder. Love and fury warred inside her chest, each breath tearing her apart. The days that followed were a torment Mara could not name. She rose at dawn, fetched water, gathered herbs, tended her fire. But every task felt hollow, empty. She told herself she hated him. Yet her wolf betrayed her with every breath. At night the ache grew unbearable. The bond burned in her chest, pulling her toward him, clawing against the walls of her stubborn pride. She dreamed of his arms around her, of the way his lips had brushed her neck, of the fire that had ignited under the silver moon. She woke, gasping, trembling, hating herself for the way her body longed for him. More than once she caught herself standing at the door, staring down the forest path, as though her yearning alone might summon him back. Each time, shame washed over her, and she slammed the door shut, as if she could shut out her own weakness. Why did it have to be him? The king, of all people. Her heart warred with itself. Love tangled with fury, longing with resentment. Surviving each day was not living. It was enduring, dragging her soul through fire while pretending she was untouched. Far away in the golden halls of the palace, Kyle faced his own storm. The council chamber was thick with incense and whispers, the nobles seated in semicircles of polished wood. Queen Mother Isabel sat beside her son, regal and sharp-eyed, her gaze locked on him as he rose from the throne. "I have made my choice," Kale said, voice steady. though his heart still ached from Mara's rejection. My Luna will not be among the nobles you parade before me. My Luna will be the healer, Mara. The chamber erupted instantly. She is a witch, one noble cried, fist slamming the table. Her family was cast out by the crown, another shouted. Bringing her back would disgrace this house. Murmurs spread like wildfire, accusations and gasps bouncing from wall to wall. Isabel rose slowly, her figure commanding silence. Her voice was sharp as steel. Have you lost your mind, my son? That woman bewitched you. There is no other explanation. A king does not take in the daughter of outcasts. Kyle clenched his fists. Bewitched? His voice rang through the chamber, deep and thunderous. You call her kindness witchcraft. You call her healing hands a curse? She does more for this kingdom in her exile than you all do with your titles and power. The nobles stirred, shifting uncomfortably, but Isabel did not flinch. She stepped closer, eyes flashing. I will not allow it. Not while I still breathe. The moon ceremony is for noble blood, for alliances that keep this kingdom strong. Do not drag us into shame with your stubbornness. Kale's jaw tightened, his wolf prowling restlessly beneath his skin. He met his mother's gaze, unflinching. I will not choose a mate to please your politics. I would rather stand alone than take another woman when my heart already belongs to her. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Some nobles lowered their eyes, scandalized. Others muttered under their breath. But Kale stood unyielding, his declaration ringing through the hall like a challenge none could ignore. The grand doors of the council chamber opened with a deep groan. Mara was shoved forward, her wrists bound, though no chain could suppress the fierce dignity in her eyes. She kept her chin raised, refusing to let the stares of nobles and guards reduce her to nothing. Her heart, however, thrashed like a bird trapped in a cage, torn between rage at Kale for deceiving her and the inexplicable pull of the bond that had not let her rest. Gasps rippled through the room as she was brought before the throne. Some whispered witch, others deceiver, their voices blending into a venomous chorus. Mara met their gazes one by one, steady and unflinching, though each accusation stabbed at her already bleeding soul. Queen Mother Isabel sat tall, draped in silk and steel, eyes sharp as blades. You stand before this court accused of sorcery, she declared, voice carrying the weight of command. Your healing, unnatural. Your bond with the king, suspicious. Speak now, or let silence be your confession. Mara clenched her jaw. Every word burned on her tongue, but she swallowed them. Better silence than wasted breath. But the nobles were not silent. One after another they rose, their words a storm. She bewitched his majesty. She manipulates the bond. Kill her now before the witch's blood spreads further. The hall thundered with demands for her death. Even the guards shifted uneasily, hands twitching at their swords. And then Kale stood, his voice cracking across the chamber like lightning, silencing the chaos. Enough. Every gaze swung toward him, but his eyes were only on her. You call her a witch, yet you run to her door in the dead of night for her healing. You condemn her, yet your children breathe today because of her hands. Hypocrites, all of you. The nobles stirred uneasily, their masks slipping. A heavy silence followed. Isabel's face tightened, lips pressed into a thin line. You disgrace this throne, my son. You drag the crown into the dirt for a village girl. Kale turned to her slowly, voice low but unyielding. Not a village girl. My chosen. My Luna. The chamber erupted again, but Mara barely heard it. Her heart pounded, torn in two. He was fighting for her, yes, but the betrayal of his lie still burned like salt in an open wound. When their eyes locked across the chamber, the bond hummed, wild and painful, like a rope pulling them closer even as her heart screamed to push him away. The council chamber fell into reluctant hush. Cale's words hung heavy in the air, a truth too sharp to deny. The nobles shifted uncomfortably, their voices stilled, their accusations swallowed by shame. But where the nobles faltered, Mara did not. Her heart remained sealed in bitterness, the sting of betrayal sharper than their hatred. She stood there, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the storm raging inside her. The mate bond burned through her veins, demanding she yield. Yet her spirit pushed back, refusing to be swayed by declarations made too late. Kale descended from the throne. Each step echoed not as kingly strides, but as a man reaching toward the one soul who had unraveled him. When he stood before her, his hand lifted, hesitated, then fell to his side. "Don't look at me as their king," he said, voice rough. "Look at me as the man who sat in your cottage by the fire, the man who listened to your laughter, the man who found peace only with you." Mara's throat tightened. Her wolf whimpered within, desperate to bridge the distance, but her human heart recoiled. "You lied," she whispered, voice cutting deeper than a shout. "You walked into my life cloaked in shadows, made me trust you, made me feel, and all the while, you were this." She gestured toward the throne, the crown, the chamber, that mire of power and deception. "I was afraid," Kyle admitted, gaze raw. "Afraid you would see the crown before you saw me. Afraid the bond between us would be tainted by duty, not love. I wanted you to know me, not the Alpha King." Her lips quivered, but her eyes stayed hard. "And what difference does it make now? You are still him, and I am still nothing to them." A ripple of murmurs stirred among the nobles, but Kyle ignored them, attention chained to her. "You are everything to me," he said fiercely. "Luna or not, crown or not, I will fight until you believe it, until you believe me." The chamber seemed to shrink around them, the council reduced to shadows. Mara felt the mate bond thrumming louder, pulling her closer to the very man she wanted to despise. Her chest ached with the war between heart and soul, longing and resentment. She turned away, hiding the tears that threatened. "You can command them, Kyle, but you cannot command me." And with that, she pulled free from the guard's grip and walked out of the chamber, her steps unsteady yet unyielding. Kyle stood rooted in place, watching her go, the silence of the nobles suffocating him. For once his crown felt heavier than ever, not because of their judgment, but because of the pain in her eyes. For days after the council chamber had fallen into uneasy silence, Queen Mother Isabel could not rid herself of the image of her son's defiance. His words still echoed, his voice strong, his resolve unshaken. But what troubled her most was not Kale's rebellion against her will. It was the name on his lips. Mara. Isabel had lived long enough to know that hearts could be deceived. Love had toppled kings before, leaving kingdoms in ruin. She could not allow her son to bind himself to a woman cloaked in whispers of witchcraft and shame. If Mara was truly dangerous, Isabel would root it out, prove it, and protect her son. And so she summoned her spies. Quiet as shadows, they were dispatched to the villages, the markets, the lonely edges of the kingdom where Mara's name was known. Isabel expected reports of curses, manipulation, of men falling under her spell. But when the first scout returned, his tale was not of sorcery, but of sacrifice. "My queen," he said, bowing low. "A child lay fevered and near death. The mother carried him under cover of night to the healer's cottage. She asked no coin, demanded no praise. She worked until her hands bled, and the child lived." Isabel dismissed him, unsettled. Perhaps it was only one account, a coincidence. But the second report followed swiftly, this time from an old woman. "She gave me herbs when no one else would. Even though I spat at her feet in the daylight, she saved my life, and I cursed her name. By the third and fourth account, Isabel could no longer deny the pattern. Every voice returned with the same refrain. Mara was a woman who healed those who hated her, who carried burdens for the same villagers who branded her an outcast. Late into the night, Isabel sat alone in her chambers, the crown's weight pressing on her brow. Her hands tightened on the armrest as memories of her own youth returned. The sharp sting of whispers, the loneliness of being judged for her choices as queen. Had she become like the nobles she once despised? Had grief and fear made her cruel? For the first time, doubt bloomed in her heart. She stared into the fire, the flames flickering like the conflict in her chest. Could it be that the woman she sought to condemn was not a threat, but a mirror of strength? Perhaps even the very balm her son had needed all along. The palace corridors were hushed when Mara was led through them, her steps echoing against polished stone. She had been summoned again, but not before the council, nor before the watchful eyes of nobles eager for her downfall. This time the summons bore only a single seal, the personal crest of Queen Mother Isabel. The guards left her before an ornate door, their expressions unreadable. Mara's hand trembled slightly as she pushed it open. Inside, the Queen Mother sat alone, her crown set aside, her silver hair unbound, softening her regal bearing. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting amber light across her face. "Come closer," Isabel said quietly, not with command, but with invitation. Mara obeyed, though her heart pounded. Every instinct warned her this was another test, another trap. But when she looked into Isabel's eyes, she saw not malice, but something else. Weariness. Perhaps even regret. For a long silence they regarded one another. Then Isabel spoke, her voice lower than Mara had ever heard it. "You remind me of a girl I once knew, proud, sharp, and too often misunderstood. She was judged for what she carried in her blood, just as you have been. The council called her unfit, but she stood her ground. That girl was me." Mara blinked, stunned. She had never imagined Isabel capable of such honesty. "I wronged you," Isabel continued, fingers tightening on the carved armrest. "The crown wronged you and your family. Your exile was not justice. It was fear dressed as wisdom. I told myself it was for the safety of the realm. But in truth, I was blinded by the voices around me, and by my own prejudice. For that, I ask your forgiveness." The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. Mara's throat constricted. She wanted to spit out her anger, to remind Isabel of the years she had spent alone, shunned, cursed by whispers. But something in Isabel's tone, something fragile, held her tongue. "You speak of forgiveness," Mara said at last, voice steady though her hands trembled. "But can you undo the nights I wept in silence? Can you undo the way children pointed at me in the streets, calling me cursed? Can you return the family I lost?" Pain flickered across Isabel's face, but she did not look away. "No," she admitted, "I cannot. But perhaps I can do this much. I can see you now. Not as an exile, nor as a danger, but as a woman of strength. As the one who healed where others would have turned away." Mara's heart wavered. No noble had ever spoken to her like this. Not with reverence, not with sincerity. "I don't know if I can forgive you or the crown," she whispered, voice breaking. "Not yet." Isabel inclined her head, accepting the answer without protest. "Then let it be not forgiveness, but truth between us. You owe me nothing, Mara, but know this. I see now why my son chose you, and though it pains me, I cannot call him wrong." The room was still, the firelight bending across their faces. Two women bound by pride, pain, and an uncertain future. For the first time, Isabel's doubt had given way to something stronger. respect. And for the first time Mara felt the walls around her heart tremble, though they did not yet fall. The grand hall of the palace was filled with murmurs. The nobles gathered once more, under the glow of 1,000 torches. Kyle sat on the high throne, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed like steel on those who once believed their whispers could sway him. At his side stood Queen Mother Isabel, her eyes quieter now, her expression unreadable. Mara had been summoned again, though this time not to defend herself, not to be accused. She walked into the hall with a heavy heart, her steps uncertain, her mind replaying Isabel's words from their private meeting. The stares followed her, sharp, probing, some even venomous. Yet for the first time there was also hesitation in those eyes, even shame. When she reached the foot of the throne, the hush became complete. Kale rose slowly, the weight of his crown glinting under the flames. His voice carried across the chamber, low but thunderous, each word deliberate. "For too long," he began. "The name of the healer's family has been spoken as though it were a curse. For too long, fear and prejudice dictated their fate. Tonight, before the moon and before this council, I break those chains." Gasps rippled across the hall. Mara's breath caught in her throat, her fingers curling against her palms. "From this day forward," Kale continued, "the exile placed upon the healer's family is lifted. Their honor is restored. Their names are to be spoken not with disdain, but with respect." His eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept over the council. "No longer will whispers rule this kingdom. No longer will fear dictate justice." The nobles shifted uneasily. Some lowered their heads, unable to meet his gaze. Others clenched their jaws but said nothing, silenced by the raw force of his authority. Isabel, watching from her place beside him, did not speak, but a subtle nod passed between her and her son. Mara stood frozen, her heart thundering. She had dreamt of this moment in secret, when she dared to hope the past could be undone, but she had never believed it would come to pass. And then, beyond the palace walls, the news spread like wildfire. By morning, the villagers no longer crept to her cottage in the shadows. They came openly, bringing gifts of grain, fruit, and flowers, their faces unmasked by fear. Some bowed deeply, others simply clasped her hands, whispering words of gratitude they had kept hidden for years. For the first time, children laughed at her doorway, not mocking, but in delight as she gave them herbs and honey. Women pressed their palms to her cheeks, tears in their eyes. Even old men who once spat at the mention of her family's name now lowered their heads in apology. Mara stood among them, the weight she had carried for so long loosening at last. She felt the ache of the years, every lonely night, every bitter tear, softened beneath the warmth of acceptance. Yet even in this triumph, her heart twisted. For the one who had freed her was the same man she still struggled to forgive. As the moon rose that night, casting its silver glow upon her cottage, Mara stepped outside and looked up. The chains of her past had broken. Yes, but the chains of her heart still held fast, torn between love and anger, desire and fear. And somewhere within the palace walls, Kale too stared into the night, longing for the day when she would look at him not as a king, not as a betrayer, but as her mate. The air in the palace gardens was thick with the perfume of night-blooming flowers, their petals unfurling beneath the silver glow of the moon. Mara wandered alone, her steps slow, her mind a storm of warring emotions. The chains of exile had been broken, yet her heart still carried scars. Every kindness she had received from Kale clashed with every memory of the pain inflicted by his crown. Love or hate, forgive or condemn. Her soul stood at that trembling edge, unable to leap. She found herself near the marble fountain, its waters glistening like liquid starlight. And there he was, Kyle, standing tall, yet his shoulders bore the weariness of a man waiting for a judgment he could not force. When his eyes met hers, they softened, his kingly armor stripped away until only the man remained. "I know," Cale said, voice quiet but steady, "that every wound carved into your past carries my family's crest. I know I cannot erase it. But Mara?" He stepped closer, his gaze holding hers, raw and unguarded. "If you can see me not as their heir, but as the man who knelt broken at your door, let me be yours. Not your king, not your enemy. Yours." Her breath caught. The ache in her chest swelled, pressing against the walls of her bitterness. Tears pricked her eyes. She had sworn never to bend, never to forgive. But the truth of her heart surged like a tide, unstoppable. Mara's voice trembled as she whispered, "I tried to hate you." Her fingers twisted at her side, but her eyes never left his. "Every day I told myself you were just another face of the crown that ruined me. But the bond won't let me lie. My heart won't let me lie. Kyle, I love you." The confession left her lips like a surrender, yet it felt like freedom. In an instant, Kyle was upon her, closing the distance with a hunger held back too long. His hands cupped her face, strong yet trembling, as though she might vanish if he did not hold her. Their lips met in a clash of fire and desperation, her bitterness melting into heat, his longing erupting into need. The kiss was not gentle. It was consuming, raw and wild, as though years of loneliness, anger, and desire had ignited all at once. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, while his arms wrapped around her waist, crushing her against him as though he could fuse them into one. Mara gasped against his mouth, and he trailed kisses along her jaw, his lips grazing the sensitive hollow of her throat. She shivered, her wolf howling within her, the bond singing louder than her doubts ever had. "I forgive you," she whispered into the night, voice breaking as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I forgive you and the crown. Not for them, but for us." Kyle pressed his forehead to hers, breath ragged, eyes burning with devotion. "You've given me more than I deserve. And I swear, Mara, I'll spend the rest of my life proving worthy of it." Under the silvered moon, their kiss deepened again. Not just a meeting of lips, but the sealing of a choice. Love over hate, forgiveness over bitterness. And as the night stretched on, the garden held witness to two souls who had finally surrendered to the truth they could no longer deny. The night of the moon ceremony arrived, heavy with anticipation. The palace grounds, vast and glowing with silver lanterns, were filled with nobles, warriors, and villagers alike. For generations, the sacred night had bound leaders to chosen mates, political unions cloaked in divine ritual. But tonight was different. Tonight, all eyes would witness a bond forged not by power, but by love. Mara stood at the edge of the ceremonial circle, her heart thrumming like a war drum. The flowing white gown shimmered faintly, as though it carried the moonlight itself. Yet despite the beauty, she felt the weight of every stare. Nobles sneered behind forced smiles. Villagers whispered, some in awe, some in doubt. At the center of the circle stood Kyle, the Alpha King, his crown gleaming, but his eyes fixed only on her. When she stepped forward, guided by the pull of the bond, the crowd parted in silence. Every breath she took seemed to echo. Every step felt like a promise. When she reached him, Kyle extended his hand. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, a question meant only for her. Her fingers slipped into his. "I am," she whispered, the tremor in her voice swallowed by the certainty in her heart. The high priestess raised her arms, voice carrying over the gathered crowd. "Under the sacred light of the moon, the Alpha King takes his Luna. Let their bond be sealed. Not by politics, not by fear, but by the will of the goddess. As the chant began, the moon broke free from a passing cloud, bathing them in silver light. The bond between them flared, a fierce and undeniable tether of soul to soul. Cale's gaze darkened with reverence as he lowered his head, brushing his lips along her neck. Mara shivered, her wolf rising in response. Then came the moment. His fangs sank gently into the tender flesh of her shoulder. A bite that was not pain, but fire. A claiming that set her blood aflame. Mara gasped, clutching him, her own lips grazing his skin in answer, her instincts guiding her to complete the bond. She bit softly, sealing the mark, their souls entwining until there was no longer him and her, only them. The crowd erupted. Some gasped in shock. Some wept openly. Others bowed in reverence. The nobles who once sneered could only lower their heads, silenced by the undeniable bond blazing in the air like sacred fire. Villagers cheered, their voices rising into the night. The once banished healer now stood not as an outcast, but as their queen. Their Luna. Kyle cupped her face and kissed her, tender but unyielding, as though the moon itself bore witness to their triumph. Mara melted into him, every scar of the past softening beneath the promise of their future. The chains of exile, of hatred, of loneliness, shattered. When they finally broke apart, the priestess's voice rose once more. Behold your king and Luna. May their love heal not only themselves, but the kingdom that bears their names. Mara's eyes swept over the crowd, and for the first time in her life, she did not see whispers of scorn. She saw respect. She saw hope. And with Cale's hand in hers, she felt the bridge rising, not just between them, but between the kingdom's wounds and the promise of tomorrow. The moon shone brighter, as if blessing their union, and in its silver light, Mara knew the truth. Their love had not only redeemed them, it had begun to redeem the world around them. Witchcraft, they had declared, and with that single word, her family's fate was sealed. She could still hear the echo of judgment, the jeering crowd as guards escorted them from the capital, stripped of honor, stripped of name. She had been just a girl then, clutching her mother's skirts as the gates closed behind them forever. Years later, her parents were gone, and she alone carried the legacy of healing, a legacy that both saved her and condemned her. A soft knock startled her, faint, hurried, like someone who did not wish to be noticed. Mara opened the door just enough to reveal a hooded figure, a villager. His eyes darted nervously. "My daughter burns with fever," he whispered, voice trembling. "Please, you must help her." Mara's expression softened. She motioned him toward the fire and opened a small chest of herbs. She worked swiftly, mixing a poultice, whispering instructions. The man's relief showed in his shaking hands as he accepted the cure. "Go quickly," she told him. "Let no one see you leave." When the door closed, silence returned. But it was a different kind, one laced with loneliness. The villagers feared her, yet they needed her. They cursed her name in daylight but sought her help in darkness. Her lips pressed into a bitter line. They feared her because the royal family had taught them to. Her hands curled into fists as she remembered the seal of the crown, the voice of the king before Kale, condemning her family. "I will never forgive them," she murmured into the empty room, voice low but sharp. "Not the crown, not the nobles. They destroyed everything." The candle flickered, and for a moment her shadow stretched long against the wall, as though the bitterness inside her had taken shape. Outside the night was still, but the winds carried whispers of change, whispers that would soon draw a stranger to her door, a stranger who would unravel her carefully built walls. The council chamber was too still, the kind of stillness that pressed against marble walls and seemed to hold its breath. Golden torches burned along the columns, their light glinting off the crests of the 4 great clans etched into stone. East, west, north, south, a reminder that this chamber did not belong to Kyle alone. At the head sat Alpha King Kyle, powerful and commanding, but tonight there was hardness in his jaw that spoke of restraint. The elders watched with restless eyes, waiting for the Queen Mother to speak. Isabel sat at his side, regal in her silver gown, her crown gleaming beneath torchlight. Though her son wore the title of king, everyone knew the Queen Mother's voice still carried the weight of steel. "Kyle?" she said at last, her voice cutting through the silence. "The moon ceremony approaches. The kingdom waits for their Luna. You must choose." A murmur of agreement rose among the nobles. "The clans grow restless, my king." One elder leaned forward. "Without a Luna, without heirs, the balance of power will weaken." Another noble added, "There are noble-born Omegas eager to serve, daughters of great houses. You have but to select one." Kale leaned back, fingers drumming against the armrest. He let their words wash over him, but his silence was not agreement. It was fire held on a leash. Finally he spoke. "And tell me, when did a mate become a political tool instead of the bond the moon goddess intended?" The question cut through the chamber. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably. Isabel's lips tightened. "Do not be naive, son. The moon goddess gives us bonds. Yes, but kings cannot afford to wait for chance. Every king before you has chosen wisely, strengthening ties with the clans." Kale turned to her, eyes flashing. "What you call wisdom, I call chains. I will not chain myself to a woman chosen for power, not love. I will not dishonor the bond by turning it into a bargain." The nobles erupted in protest. Isabel raised her hand, silencing them. "Reckless, Kale. The kingdom will not wait for your heart to make a choice. You are not just a man. You are the Alpha King. Your duty comes before your desire." His hand clenched. "My duty is to protect this kingdom, not to bind myself to a mate I cannot honor. A Luna chosen from your lists would not be my partner. She would be your puppet." The words hung like lightning. Some nobles gasped, others whispered furiously. "Careful, son," Isabel said softly, though her tone carried warning. "Your words cut deeper than you know." Kyle rose, towering over the chamber. "Then hear me clearly. I will not choose from your lists. I will not bow to your politics. When I take a Luna, it will be by the will of the moon goddess, not by the hunger of nobles." Silence consumed the chamber. Isabel's eyes narrowed. "And what will you do, Kyle? Wait for fate to deliver a mate to your door?" The corners of Kale's lips curved in the faintest smirk. "Perhaps I will. Perhaps I will find her myself." Gasps filled the chamber. "Absurd! A king does not stoop to such foolishness." But Kale did not flinch. "You call it foolishness. I call it freedom." Without waiting for their protests, he strode from the chamber, his footsteps echoing against stone. Behind him, chaos erupted. By the window of his private chambers, the moon hung low, silver and watchful. Kale leaned against the cold stone. The Alpha King everyone saw was a man in fine robes, crowned with gold. But beneath it all, what was he? A son bound by tradition? Or a man who longed just once for love, untainted by politics? A soft knock broke his thoughts. Isabel entered without waiting. "You spoke like a child in the council," she said, tone measured. "Reckless, stubborn. Do you understand the danger you invite?" "I understand. That is why I must go." Her brow furrowed. "Go where?" He opened a chest at the foot of his bed. Inside lay simple garments, plain, rough, the kind worn by men who slept in stables. He lifted them slowly. "Kyle, do not tell me." "I will not be forced into a union," he interrupted. If I am to have a mate, it will not be chosen by this council. I will find her myself, away from these walls. You would abandon your throne? I will not abandon it. You will hold power in my absence. Let them think I am away hunting alliances if you must, but I will not return until I have an answer, not from their lists, but from the moon goddess herself. Silence stretched between them. You are your father's son, Isabel said at last, voice low. Too proud, too stubborn. This kingdom cannot afford your whims. Cale paused, looking at her. For a fleeting moment the hardness in his eyes softened. It is not whim, Mother. It is truth. If fate has chosen someone for me, I will find her, even if I must walk among beggars to see her face. He stripped away his fine robes, laying aside every symbol of power. He dressed in rough trousers, a torn tunic, and a faded cloak. His crown he left on the table, gleaming under torchlight like a silent witness to his rebellion. When he pulled the hood over his head, he was no longer the Alpha King. He was a man stripped bare, nameless, and unguarded. He left before dawn. No guards, no horses, just the weight of his choice and the path stretching into the unknown. The kingdom outside the palace walls was harsher than he had imagined. Roads were muddy, villages crowded with suspicion. He passed through marketplaces where merchants shoved him aside, muttering curses at his shabby appearance. By evening he found himself at a tavern, the smell of roasted meat taunting his hunger. He entered quietly, hoping for warmth, perhaps a scrap of food. But the moment he stepped in, heads turned. An alpha seated at a long table sneered. "Look here, boys, a wolf without a pack." Laughter erupted. Another alpha, broad-shouldered and scarred, leaned forward. "No Omega in her right mind would touch you, stranger." The mocking words stung deeper than they should have. Kyle's wolf growled within him, pride demanding he reveal himself. But he swallowed it down. He could not betray his disguise. When he approached the bar, the innkeeper waved him off. "No coin, no food, get out." Outside, a group of young Omegas passed, their laughter ringing. They glanced at him, ragged, hooded, worn. One wrinkled her nose. "Disgusting," she muttered loudly. Another giggled. "No wonder no one would ever choose him." Their words cut sharper than any blade. For the first time, Cale felt the sting of being unseen, unwanted. By nightfall, he was cold, hungry, and weary. He found no welcome, no kindness, only doors shut in his face. And yet beneath the weight of rejection, a question lingered. How long could he walk this road before doubt devoured him? As night deepened, hunger twisted his stomach until his vision blurred. The storm grew violent, wind howling through the trees. He stumbled up a hill, his strength almost gone. And then, through sheets of rain, he saw it. A faint glow cutting through the darkness. A cottage, small and lonely, perched against the storm. With the last of his strength, Cale pushed himself forward. He reached the door, raised a trembling hand, and knocked weakly. His body gave way, collapsing heavily against the wooden frame. Inside, Mara stirred at the noise. Her keen ears caught what others might have dismissed. Compassion, stronger than fear, pulled her to rise. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the storm. Her eyes fell upon the broken figure. At her doorstep, mud-smeared, trembling, soaked to the bone. A stranger cast aside by the world. Her healer's heart clenched. Without thought, she bent low, lifting him. His weight sagged against her, but she pulled him inside, laying him by the firelight. For the first time in his journey, Cale felt warmth. A soft voice spoke over the storm, gentle and firm. "You're safe now." And though he had no strength to answer, his wolf stirred, recognizing something it had long sought but never found. The cottage smelled of herbs and wood. The fire crackled gently. Kyle stirred faintly, feeling steady hands on him. Soft, deliberate, careful. They did not shove him aside or strike him as others had, but held him as though he were something fragile that deserved saving. Mara bent over him, her fingers pressed lightly against his forehead. Heat lingered there, not from fever, but exhaustion. She reached for a wooden cup filled with warm broth and pressed it gently against his lips. The rich scent of herbs filled his nose. He drank, and for the first time in days, the ache of hunger eased. "Slowly," she warned, tilting the cup away. "You'll make yourself sick if you rush." Kale studied her through half-lidded eyes. Her face was framed by loose strands of dark hair. She looked nothing like the noble women of the court. Her beauty was quiet, almost hidden. Yet it shone brighter than any crown he had ever seen. She didn't look at him with disgust or mockery, only concern. When the broth was gone, she guided him toward the small cot by the fire. He tried to resist, but his legs betrayed him. She caught him, supporting him with surprising strength. "You're no burden," she said firmly. She gathered her tools, jars of crushed herbs, rolls of cloth, a basin of steaming water. Kneeling beside him, she began to peel away the ragged fabric clinging to his skin. Beneath it, bruises bloomed across his ribs, scratches scored his arms. Her breath hitched at the cruelty. "No one should be left like this," she murmured. Her hands were skilled, practiced. She cleaned each wound with careful precision, her touch gentle yet firm. The sting of herbs burned, but her presence soothed. "Almost done. You'll heal better than you think." Kale found himself watching her more than the flames. He had been shown cruelty, mockery, disdain. But here, in this little cottage on the edge of the kingdom, kindness poured into him like warmth after endless cold. He had been a king all his life, obeyed, feared, revered. Yet never had anyone touched him with such quiet care, asking for nothing in return. When she finally tied the last strip of cloth, she sat back and sighed. "That will hold. You need rest more than anything. Stay until the storm passes." Her words soothed him like an invitation. His wolf, restless from days of rejection, stirred inside him, drawn to her voice, to her scent, to the calm strength that wrapped around her. But Kale said nothing of who he was. Not king, not alpha, not ruler. To her, he was just a stranger. He wanted, needed, it to remain that way. As the firelight flickered, Mara adjusted the blanket over him. "Sleep," she whispered. Her hand brushed his forehead once more, light as a feather. Yet it sent a current racing through him, awakening something he never thought he could feel. Kale closed his eyes, not because he was tired, but because he wanted to hold on to the sound of her voice, the warmth of her presence, the tenderness of her touch. And for the first time in his reign, he felt seen. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the world washed clean. Mist curled through the forest, and the damp earth breathed out the smell of rain and pine. Inside, the fire had burned low. Kyle stirred, blinking at faint shafts of sunlight slipping through cracks in the shutters. His body ached, but the sharp edge of pain had dulled. From across the room came the gentle scrape of wood against stone. Mara knelt at the hearth, stoking embers back into flame. There was no trace of weariness, only calm rhythm. "You're awake," she said without turning. "I thought you'd sleep longer." He cleared his throat, surprised at how rough it sounded. "I don't usually sleep this well." She looked over her shoulder, a small curve touching her lips. "Then perhaps your body was long overdue for rest." She set a pot of porridge over the fire. "Can you sit?" Slowly he pushed himself upright. "I can manage." She carried a wooden bowl to him, pressing it into his hands. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it were a gift. In truth, it was. When silence stretched, Mara tilted her head, I still don't know your name, stranger. Kale hesitated. He lowered his gaze. Call me Kale. Just a wanderer. I've been searching for a place to belong, though I've not yet found it. Mara studied him, something softening in her expression. A wanderer, she repeated quietly. That explains the weariness in your eyes. The road can be unkind. You may call me Mara. Something in him stirred at the sound of her name. He let it linger in his chest like a flame refusing to die. And you? He finally asked. Why do you live here? Apart from the villages, alone in the woods. Surely a healer like you would be treasured. Her hands stilled. For a long moment she said nothing, only staring into the fire. Treasured? She gave a faint, bitter laugh. No, stranger. My family was cast out, branded as witches by the very ones who should have honored us. Kyle's chest tightened. My mother could mend bones with a touch. My father knew the roots that could cure fever. I inherited both their gifts. She drew in a breath. But the nobles feared us. The king. Not the one who reigns now, but those before him. They called it witchcraft. They stripped us of our name, our land, our honor. We were driven to the edges like vermin. She swallowed hard, eyes glistening but unbroken. They killed my parents. The cold did what swords could not. I was left alone, alone to survive, alone to heal, alone to hate. Her gaze lifted to meet his, fierce and unflinching. So when you ask why I live far away, it is because the world I once belonged to spat me out, and I have no desire to crawl back. Kale gripped the bowl tighter, his wolf restless within him, the words carved into his chest like claws. His family's legacy, the throne he sat upon, it had brought this pain to her. To reveal himself now would be to tear open her wounds anew. I'm sorry, he said softly, the words feeling woefully small. Her shoulders eased, though her eyes did not soften. Do not be sorry. You did not exile me. But if you wish to know me, you must know this. I do not forgive easily, and I will never forget what the royal house took from me. The fire crackled between them. Kale stared into the flames, his heart caught between duty and desire, truth and deception. He had set out to find a mate who would love him for who he was. But now, sitting across from this banished healer, he wondered if the truth of who he was would destroy the fragile bond beginning to form. And for the first time, Alpha King Kale felt fear, not of losing power, but of losing her. The day passed quietly. Mara moved with purpose, grinding herbs, laying bundles of dried leaves across rafters, mending torn cloth. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight. By nightfall, the forest hushed under the silver pull of the moon. Kale lay on the cot by the fire, feigning sleep, but his ears picked up a sound. Footsteps, light and hurried, stopping at the door before a timid knock followed. Mara, unsurprised, rose at once. She opened the door just enough to let a cloaked figure slip inside. A woman clutching a small boy whose face burned red with fever. The child whimpered, breath shallow. The mother's eyes darted to Kyle on the cot, wary. He's a traveler, Mara said. Focus on your son. She guided them to a stool, already reaching for jars. She mixed herbs into a steaming cup, cooled it, coaxed the boy to drink. Her touch was gentle, her voice steady. Slowly, the child's breathing eased. The mother clutched Mara's hand, gratitude brimming. Bless you. Mara only nodded, ushering them back into the night as silently as they'd come. But before long, another knock came, and another. All through the night, villagers arrived, cloaked men with sprained ankles, women with swollen bellies needing herbs, even a hunter bitten by his own hound. Each came in secret, whispering thanks before vanishing into shadows. Kyle watched from the cot, silent, struck by the contradiction. These were the same villagers who would cross the road to avoid her in daylight, who spoke of her with hushed suspicion. Yet under cover of night they came, desperate, trusting. And she, the woman cast out, received them without hesitation. When the last visitor left, Cale broke the silence. "Why do you do it?" Mara turned, startled by his voice. He sat upright, eyes steady on her. "Why help them? They hide you like a shameful secret. Yet they come when they need saving. If it were me," he trailed off, bitterness tightening his words, "I would turn them away." Her gaze lingered, calm and unwavering. "Then you would not be a healer." He frowned, but she stepped closer. "It does not matter how they treat me. Their sickness bears no grudge. Their wounds do not care for politics or pride. If I turned them away, I would be no better than the nobles who condemned my family. My duty comes first. Always." The words struck him like thunder. Here stood a woman who had lost everything: home, family, name, and still chose compassion over vengeance. He looked at her, really looked, as the firelight carved her profile against shadows. Her strength was not in dominance, but in a heart that refused to harden. And in that moment Cale felt his wolf stir more fiercely than ever, not of hunger, but of yearning, to claim her, to protect her, to make her his. But he said nothing, biting down the urge. For now he was only a wanderer at her door, and she was the healer who had chosen to let him in. The days lengthened into something Mara had not known for years, a gentle rhythm shared with another soul. Cale remained in her cottage, though he spoke often of moving on. Somehow his boots stayed by the door. His voice filled the silence. His presence slipped into the fabric of her daily life. One morning he stood outside chopping wood, wrestling with the axe. Mara leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching him struggle. He paused, puffing, and glanced at her with mock irritation. "Go on, laugh." She raised her brow, feigning composure. "I wasn't going to." "Yes, you were." He swung again, the log barely splitting. "You're biting back a smile. Cruel healer watching a poor wanderer suffer." Her laugh escaped before she could swallow it, light and unguarded. She pressed her fingers to her lips, startled by the sound. It had been so long. Cale straightened, grinning as though he'd won something precious. "There," he said softly. "That laugh suits you more than silence." Her chest tightened, and she turned away, suddenly flustered. Why did he always seem to peel away the layers she'd built to protect herself? Later, as they gathered herbs in the forest, he crouched beside her, holding up a stalk uncertainly. "This one?" She shook her head, reaching to guide his hand. "No, look closer. See the veins? The healing root hides beneath." Her fingers brushed his, and for a moment neither moved. His hand was rough, calloused, yet steady beneath hers. She withdrew quickly, focusing on the earth. Warmth spread up her arm like fire she could not quench. That night, over a simple meal, Cale leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You live so far from the village. Do you never feel lonely?" Her spoon stilled. She hesitated, then lifted her gaze. Loneliness became easier to bear than their stares. Out here, the trees don't whisper. The wind doesn't mock. Silence is kinder than people. He said nothing, but his eyes held hers, steady and unyielding, as if her words carved themselves into him. She felt exposed, seen in a way that frightened her and yet warmed her. Later, as she carried water from the stream, the damp stones betrayed her. Her foot slipped, and before she could cry out, arms wrapped around her, pulling her against a body solid and warm. Her breath caught. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and sure. For one fragile moment, the world disappeared. No whispers, no exile, only the safety of his hold. "Careful," Kyle murmured, voice low against her ear. When he released her, she lingered in the memory of his touch, heat rising in her cheeks. That night, lying awake, she turned it over in her mind. He was the first man who did not flinch from her, the first who looked at her not with suspicion or fear, but with something she had never known, something that made her feel like more than an outcast. A dangerous ache bloomed in her chest, one she dared not name, but it grew stronger with every glance, every laugh, every quiet word shared in the stillness of her cottage. For the first time in her life, Mara felt the fragile spark of being wanted. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves. Mara sat by the doorway, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders, watching the silver moon climb higher. Its light spilled across the clearing, painting her world in pale fire. Behind her, Cale set aside the logs he'd carried in. His presence filled the small space, steady and unshakable, yet charged with something new, something restless. He stepped closer, the faint warmth of his body brushing against her as he sat beside her. For a long while, neither spoke. The quiet between them was no longer awkward. It was alive, thrumming with unspoken words. Finally, Cale turned to her, voice low. "You're quiet tonight." She forced a small smile. "The moon has a way of stealing words from me." His gaze lingered on her profile, the way the silver light kissed her skin. Something primal stirred within him. He had spent nights resisting it, holding back the fire clawing at his chest. But under this moon, her nearness was unbearable. Mara felt his eyes on her and shifted, pulse quickening. "Why do you look at me that way?" she asked, voice trembling. Cale leaned closer, his hand brushing her arm in a touch so light it sent a shiver through her. "Because," he whispered, "I cannot look away." Her breath hitched. His face was inches from hers, eyes dark and searching. She thought, no, she was certain. He would kiss her. Her lips parted in anticipation, heart racing with wild, forbidden hope. But instead of claiming her mouth, his lips grazed the hollow of her neck. Mara gasped the sensation like lightning darting through her veins. Her hands gripped his shoulders instinctively, torn between pulling him closer and pushing him away. "Cale," her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with confusion, fear, and something far more dangerous. He inhaled her scent, raw need tightening every muscle. His wolf howled within him, urging, demanding. He pressed his lips against her skin once more, softer this time, reverent, before the sharp edge of his teeth scraped her flesh. Mara froze, pulse thundering. Then came the bite, swift, fierce, and searing. Pain lanced her neck, but it was swallowed instantly by a rush of heat, a binding fire that sank deep into her soul. Her body trembled, caught between shock and surrender. Yet Cale's arms held her firmly, grounding her. She felt something beyond flesh in that moment, a tether, invisible yet unbreakable, winding her essence to his. When he finally pulled back, breath ragged, the mark glistened under moonlight, crimson against pale skin. His eyes burned as he looked at her, torn between triumph and fear. Mara touched the spot, fingers brushing the sting. "What? What did you do to me?" Cale's jaw tightened, chest heaving. He longed to tell her, longed to reveal who he truly was and what that bite meant. But fear gripped him. "I bound you to me," he said softly, voice rough with restraint. "You are mine now." Her heart raced wildly, thoughts a whirlwind. She wanted to resist. Yet the warmth flooding her veins betrayed her. Against all reason, part of her wanted to stay in his arms, to believe in the strange, consuming bond that had sparked between them under the moonlight. And so, in the silence that followed, neither spoke further. Only the silver moon bore witness to the fire that had begun, and the secret Cale still carried like a blade pressed to his own heart. Dawn crept slowly across the horizon. Mara stirred in her bed, the faint sting at her neck still fresh, a reminder of the night before. Her fingers brushed the tender mark, and a rush of heat swept through her. When she stepped outside, she found Kyle waiting at the edge of the clearing. His cloak was fastened, his pack slung over his shoulder. There was heaviness in his posture, as though he fought with himself to stand there. "You're leaving?" Her voice cracked, sharper than she intended. His gaze met hers, dark and unreadable, yet softened by something she could not name. "I must. There are places I need to return to, duties I cannot ignore." The words stung more than she expected. She crossed her arms, trying to shield herself from the sudden cold sweeping through her chest. "So you came here, turned my world upside down, and now you walk away." Kyle stepped closer, his hand reaching as though to touch her, then faltering mid-air. "I will return," he said firmly, almost a vow. "I swear it, Mara." Her heart skipped. He had finally spoken her name, and the sound of it on his lips melted something inside her. Yet the promise carried no comfort. Promises were fragile. "And if you don't?" He held her gaze, jaw tightening. "Then I would rather die than fail you." Before she could reply, he turned and walked into the forest, his figure swallowed by mist and morning light. The cottage felt unbearably empty after his absence. At first, she busied herself with chores, gathering herbs, tending her fire, patching worn blankets. But everything reminded her of him. The sound of an axe against wood made her recall his laughter. The scent of herbs brought back his hands brushing hers. Even the moonlight spilling across her bed at night whispered of his lips grazing her neck. But it was the bond, the wolf bond, that tormented her most. It tugged at her chest, a constant pull toward where he was, a restlessness that gave her no peace. At night, she tossed and turned, her wolf inside her pacing, howling, yearning for its mate. She whispered into the dark, though no one could hear. "Why did you do this to me?" Her voice broke, tears sliding silently into her pillow. Days bled into nights, and still he did not return. Each sunrise stretched into endless hours of longing. Each evening she found herself at the edge of the forest, staring into the distance, hoping, fearing, waiting. It frightened her, this need that consumed her. She had lived alone for so long, teaching herself to be strong, to survive without anyone. Yet one man, a stranger who carried secrets he would not share, had unraveled her so completely. The wolf bond made her hunger for him, but it was her heart that betrayed her most. She realized with a mix of dread and wonder that she had fallen for him, fallen deeply, hopelessly. And that love terrified her more than her exile, more than the whispers of witchcraft, more than any curse she had ever borne. Each day of solitude became torture, every breath a reminder of the man who had marked her under the silver moon. And in the quiet of her lonely nights, when the bond clawed at her soul, she whispered a truth she would never dare admit aloud. "Come back to me." 7 days. 7 endless days of silence, of restless pacing, of waiting for footsteps that never came. The bond had not eased. It had only grown sharper, clawing at Mara's soul with every sunrise. On the 7th evening, when the moon rose high and pale, she heard it, the sound of hooves thundering up the hill. Her heart leapt before her mind could catch up. She rushed to the doorway, pulse racing, eyes straining through the silver mist. But the figure that emerged was not the man she had cradled, nor the wanderer she had nursed. It was him, and yet not him. Cale rode tall on a black stallion, clad in regal armor that glinted in the moonlight, his cloak trailing like a shadow. At his side, knights flanked him, their banners fluttering with the crest of the royal house. His head was held high, his presence unmistakable. Mara's breath caught in her throat, the world tilting violently. The beggar she had fed, The stranger she had laughed with, the man who had bound her with his bite, was the Alpha King himself. He dismounted, eyes searching hers, soft with the same longing that had kept her awake at night. "Mara." His voice was gentle, almost pleading. "I've come back to you." Her stomach twisted. Fury rose like wildfire, burning through the ache of longing.